1,400 hours. The frozen barrier off Greenland. A massive thermobaric shock tears through the Arctic silence as a Mach 3 Yakon missile, Russian steel guided by a Chinese AI core, cuts through the fog. Inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, every screen flashes red. 5,000 sailors, 90 seconds. A billion-dollar precision strike built to shake the balance of power. World War III no longer feels like a distant possibility. It is a 13-meter kinetic threat racing straight toward the deck. The Atlantic does more than claim ships. It buries the truth. Off the coast of Greenland, the Cold Wall has turned into a digital graveyard where the old rules of naval warfare have vanished into the abyss. As the blizzard roars at 100 knots, the U.S. Navy is not only battling the storm, it is moving through a chain of impossible anomalies. It started with a faint signal from below. The Navy's integrated undersea surveillance network, a billion-dollar grid of sensors spread across the seabed, detected a 0.05% shift in the harmonic rhythm of Arctic currents. There was no engine sound, no propeller noise, only an unnatural 0.1 decibel change where absolute silence should have been. Something was moving beneath the ice, using 50 million-ton icebergs as cover to hide its signature. These hidden riders were slipping into the inner perimeter of the carrier strike group, masking themselves behind a wall of frozen mass. But the Aegis combat system does not simply listen, it predicts. The silence itself was marked as hostile before the intruders even reached the 20-mile perimeter. Then the digital fog rolled in. Without warning, 200 micro-stealth drones, each barely 50 centimeters wide, burst from the mist and began redrawing the American radar picture. This was not ordinary jamming. It was a full battlefield illusion. The drones flooded the sky with synthetic aperture signatures, projecting a false image of the USS Gerald R. Ford 10 miles from its real location. It was a digital hall of mirrors designed to make U.S. forces waste interceptors on shadows. But the F-35 Lightning IIs orbiting at 30,000 feet did not fall for it. Using their APG-81 AESA radars, they dissected the fog signal by signal, jumping across 1,000 frequencies every second. In under 1.5 seconds, the F-35s cut through the deception and locked onto the source, a stealth destroyer hidden in the gray. The opposing force, however, was watching without ever turning on its own eyes. Active emitters went dark. Passive radar took over, tracking the 100,000-ton American carrier by reading how satellite TV and cellular signals bounced off its deck. It was a silent surveillance method NATO was never meant to catch. The Ford's Block 3 systems answered with a ghost surge. The carrier did not simply disappear. It generated 5,000 identical coordinate signatures across the Greenland basin. Suddenly, the enemy's display was crowded with thousands of possible carriers. Finding the real Ford became the tactical equivalent of identifying a single raindrop in the middle of a hurricane. Then the Smart Hunter made its move. The Yakon missile recognized that the American Nulka decoys were false and used onboard AI to study the countermeasure pattern in real time. It was a 13-meter Predator that understood it was being deceived, swinging its Mach 3 nose back toward the actual deck. But by then, it had entered the range of the Navy's directed energy defenses. No conventional interceptor was launched. Instead, a concentrated beam of high-frequency microwave energy hit the missile and overwhelmed its internal electronics in midair. The threat did not erupt dramatically. It simply lost coherence, spiraled out, and vanished into the freezing sea. After their precision shot failed, the attackers escalated to saturation. 20 missiles launched from 20 different directions at Mach 2.5. They believed no defense system on Earth could process that many variables at once. They were wrong. Through Aegis Baseline 10, the strike group fought as one cloud-connected combat organism using launch-on-remote capability. A destroyer 50 miles away supplied tracking data, while a cruiser deeper in the formation launched SM-6 interceptors. It created a seamless web of fire, processing 100 tracks every second and clearing each incoming threat before it ever reached the horizon. At what moment did the attackers realize they were no longer facing a fleet, but a combat network? And while missiles were being erased from the sky, one final silent threat remained below. A rogue submarine had slipped to a depth of 800 feet directly beneath the Ford, preparing for a point-blank strike. But instead of an opening, it found itself under the watch of a Virginia-class attack submarine that had been resting on the seabed in ultra-quiet mode for 48 hours. The Navy had not just detected the sub. Mark 48 AD cap torpedoes were already locked onto its reactor. The ambush was complete before the first move had even been made. The opposing commander attempted a last-second withdrawal toward Russian waters, but the final response did not come from a torpedo. It came through code. Using an encrypted cyberlink, Navy specialists penetrated the vessel's satellite firewall and delivered a logic bomb directly into its steering and propulsion systems. In seconds, a billion-dollar stealth destroyer became a powerless hulk, stranded in the Atlantic. This was more than stopping a ship. It was a demonstration that against a fully integrated digital war machine, any single weapon becomes just another variable waiting to be removed. Yet, as the American crew began to absorb the scale of what had just happened, the Ford's internal security network registered one more anomaly. It was not on radar. It was already on the hull. This was the Shadow Mirror Twist, a contingency so ruthless it could only have come from the darkest planning rooms of Moscow's GRU. While the Navy was focused on Mach 3 missiles and cutting through layers of digital deception, those iceberg-riding UUVs had quietly finished their real assignment. They were never just sensor platforms, they were delivery pods. As the Ford's Aegis system was occupied by the saturation attack, 12 elite commandos in liquid oxygen stealth suits, designed to remain nearly invisible against the freezing Arctic water, had already climbed the carrier's massive hull. Using high-frequency magnetic resonance tools, they bypassed the outer security perimeter and moved toward the ship's digital spine. Their objective was clear. If they could not disable the Ford from the outside, they would try to cripple it from within. They believed they had found the one weakness in America's system of systems approach, the human layer. But the U.S. Navy does not leave blind spots. It creates controlled corridors. The instant the first magnetic boot touched the titanium deck, the Ford's internal AI sentinels had already registered the pressure change. No alarms sounded, no lights came on. Instead, the Navy initiated a ghost containment protocol. The commandos were allowed to believe they were moving undetected into the hangar deck. They were being guided deeper inside, carefully, almost effortlessly, through a network of reinforced corridors that weren't escape routes at all, but pre-engineered containment zones. While the commandos focused on deploying a logic virus into the Ford's server systems, the ship quietly shifted into a full biometric lockdown. Doors sealed, elevators froze, ventilation shafts locked tight behind layers of reinforced steel. In an instant, the elite strike team lost all freedom of movement. They weren't hunters anymore. They were trapped inside a system that had already anticipated every step. And to complete the takedown, no Marines were deployed. Instead, the Navy activated localized high-intensity infrasound emitters. These non-lethal acoustic systems disrupted the inner ear, causing immediate disorientation and loss of balance. Within seconds, the entire team was incapacitated. In less than a minute, the operation was over. What was meant to be a covert strike became a recorded case study for naval intelligence. This was the real twist. The opposing side believed the chaos outside, the missiles, the drones, was the main battle. In reality, it was all a distraction. The boarding scenario had already been simulated thousands of times in virtual environments. What arrived in the Arctic was an outdated playbook against a system designed to evolve in real time. They stepped into a game they didn't fully understand, only to realize too late that the environment itself was the opponent. The illusion collapsed. What remained was another costly failure, not just of equipment, but of approach. Against a fully integrated digital system, there are no shortcuts, only different ways to fall behind. Even though this scenario is a high-intensity fictional simulation, the technologies and operational mindset behind it reflect real-world naval doctrine. The key takeaway is simple. Engaging the Ford isn't about facing a single vessel. It's about confronting an entire interconnected architecture that adapts faster than any individual system can react. What unfolded near Greenland wasn't just a tactical loss. It highlighted a deeper gap, one built on experience, integration, and data. Advanced hardware alone isn't enough. Without real operational depth, even the most sophisticated systems remain theoretical. Think of it this way. One side brings machines optimized in simulations, precise, efficient, impressive on paper. The other brings systems shaped by decades of real-world conditions, tested in storms, ice, and uncertainty. It's the difference between design and experience. The U.S. CET Navy operates on layers of accumulated data, decades of observing how materials behave, how signals shift, how environments evolve. It's not just technology, it's memory at scale. You can replicate components, but you can't easily replicate that level of integration. The constant, seamless coordination between satellites, submarines, and aircraft that transforms separate units into a unified network. Another critical factor is decision-making. In more centralized systems, major actions depend on approval from far away. That delay matters. In contrast, U.S. naval operations distribute authority. Commanders and pilots are trained to act instantly, adapting in real time without waiting for instructions. While one side is still processing information, the other has already adjusted and moved forward. Now imagine an alternate outcome. What if that missile had reached its target? Even in that scenario, the response wouldn't stop at damage control. The Ford-class carriers are built with advanced compartmentalization systems capable of isolating and stabilizing impacted sections rapidly. The ship is designed to absorb and recover, not just survive. And beyond the ship itself, the broader network would respond. Detection of an attack would trigger a cascade of strategic decisions across multiple domains: sea, air, space, and cyber. The conflict wouldn't remain localized for long. If escalation continued further, the entire operational environment could shift. Control of communications, visibility, and coordination would become the decisive factors. In modern conflict scenarios, it's not just about physical assets. It's about who maintains awareness and control of information. That's the real lesson from this Arctic encounter. Speed and firepower still matter, but they're no longer the defining edge. The advantage belongs to whoever can process, adapt, and act across a fully connected system faster than the opponent. The ocean hasn't changed, but the way it's fought over has. So what do you think? In a scenario like this, does technological integration outweigh raw speed and power? Or is the balance starting to shift again?